This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation.
Hi guys, my name is Kądzielska-Koper and you are watching Common Sense Generation. Today we talk about political philosophy. With me is Professor Ferenc Hörcher.
Hello.
A Hungarian professor of philosophy and political thought. Professor, you have a lot of achievements and one of them is a great book about Roger Scruton's philosophy. But first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for the invitation, and I'm happy to be here. My background is in a communist country of the 60s, 70s and 80s when I was a child and a youth. And that determined my interest in politics, because to live in a totalitarian state is an experience which determines your life. And perhaps the most important moment in my life was 1990, when my country became free and our life changed a lot. And since then, I became a political philosopher and a historian of political thought. I studied in Budapest, Oxford, and Leuven in Belgium. But I also researched in Cambridge for my PhD, which was on the Scottish Enlightenment. And my interests are two things. First of all, philosophy of art, because I think that the human condition allows us to have a sort of self-reflection, which is quite exceptional among living beings, and that is that we can express our feelings and thoughts through works of art. And that's something which is special, as I said.
And divine, somehow.
Yes, indeed, it connects to the divine. Why? Because through a perfect work of art, we can pass over our imperfections, and we can create something out of nothing, which will be forever. That's at least the greatest works of art, from Homer to Shakespeare to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. These works survive humanity, and they address the divine indeed in us. And the other interest, just to finish on that, is politics, as I mentioned, because of my youth. And I especially focused on the two political philosophies, that of liberalism, which was the mainstream at 1919. People will remember Fukuyama claiming that was the end of history and the victory, the final victory of liberalism, and conservatism, which I think is now enjoying a kind of revival, a renaissance. And that's partly because of the work of Roger Scruton, the late Sir Roger Scruton, whose work is by now accepted beyond the conservative circles. He becomes perhaps the most important, or one of the most important voices of the turn of the millennium, and a philosopher who addresses the basic issues of our days as well.
And this is this wonderful achievement of philosophy of Roger Scruton, is the fact that he brought conservatism back to academic floor, back to the universities, as not as a sign of a mediocre mind or under education, that we're just people who have certain conservative beliefs are just not well educated enough, and if they were, that they will be liberal. But he showed that the life of a mind of people who are, it is just a path, it is a decision, and showed in many spheres, and which comes from intuition, and very often aesthetic intuitions. And I know that you were able to summarize his work and analyze it in your latest book. So it's philosophy and art, two things. Two things very important to Roger Scruton, and a funny thing is that are actually very much connected. Very often that things which didn't happen in politics, they happen in art and then they go to politics. But tell us about this, your book and your approach.
Yes, the title of the book is Art and Politics in Roger Scruton's Conservative Philosophy. And that's because I think these are the two topics that kept him engaged in his professional career as well as in his private life. He was a very talented man, interested in philosophy, but also interested in different art forms, in particular in music. He was playing the piano, he was a composer, composed operas and individual songs. So he was a practicing artist. He wrote novels as well. But he was also a critic partly of art, but also partly of our culture generally, living in an age of cultural war that was crucial, but also a critic of our political life and our recent political habits, which went against the traditional British way. He was an Englishman and as such a great admirer and defender of British liberty, as he understood it, which was the tradition of British conservatism. Because he thought that, in fact, the common law, which he studied under the tuition of legal scholars at the Inns Court in London, the common law was a way of life and a way of thinking which allowed people to work out a well-ordered society, a society in which everyone could go for his or her aims and still live together in a peaceful and noble manner. And that's where the two things come together. His interests in the traditional political arrangements of his community and his interests in art, because order is a concept both for politics. You want an ordered society, no matter what your other priorities are. And order is a concept in art because in a work of art we try to bring order into our life, which otherwise seems to be meaningful and chaotic, as well as into nature, which is imperfect as far as human beings are concerned, because we are just human in the sense that we have sins and are ready to make mistakes. But in the work of art, we can create something which is beyond ourselves. And his very interesting comparison is in this respect that we can approach the divine through the work of art, as well as through love. That's the late Scruton, where he tries to emphasize that there is an art of human relationships. I think that's a very powerful point in his work, and that's love, an ordered and peaceful existence together with the others, connected to the ancient concept of friendship, but also to the Christian notion of caritas.
I remember in his book, How to Be Conservative, what really shocked me in a way is the fact that he goes through every sort of political statement or position, and he shows the truth of it. So the truth of liberalism, the truth of communism, the truth of conservatism, the truth of many statements, and show what are, for example, our intuitions of people, why they follow those patterns, and what is valuable in those positions and what is wrong. So what I would, for me, especially as a young student, really shocked in a way, but I also, that he understood those situations. He saw also human beings, intellectuals, and he understood that in a working society, as you mentioned before, all of those groups have to somehow cooperate, and that there is also a certain truth in it. either in the intuition or the analysis, sometimes not in the way to resolve the problems, but the point of seeing the problem is important. And it was his, he needed to put also so much work in order to see the other statements.
Yes, of course. He was just, such a bright and talented man that he read very widely, and he remembered all that, and he could use it for his work. All those inspirations coming from very different traditions, and appreciating opposition as well to his own thought. He became conservative in 1968 in an age of revolutions. He was in Paris during the student revolutions, and that made him, the opponent of all that which we associate with the 68 student revolutions. On the other hand, by the end of his life, he became a person who appreciated, for example, the labor tradition in British politics, which was important for him in his family context as well. He had a rather troubled relationship in his youth, in his childhood and youth, with his father, who was quite a strong character, and with a political belief in the labor values of British politics, and of course Scruton, who became a conservative, was opposed to those ideas. And by the end of his life, he made peace with that heritage, and he came closer to what could be called now a kind of blue Tory ideas, or rather blue labor idea, coming to a combination perhaps of different value systems, and appreciating different values of different social groups and traditions. And in this sense, his offer for us is that we can go for our values if we appreciate those of the others, and we are ready for a dialogue, which is the major achievement of the British Parliament, which was the institution that he appreciated most in the British tradition, perhaps.
It's such a valuable voice, especially right now when all the Western world is so much divided into very often two-party system, where one party wants to rule the whole country and doesn't even find a place for the other one in the neither in the political system nor in the society. And after all, we all are citizens of certain countries, and should be place for everyone in it. But what the most sophisticated of Roger Scruton's is definitely his essays and his books on aesthetic. Those are, let's say, the most for philosophers, because the rest is so beautifully written that can be popular reading as well. This is the power of his writing, in my opinion. But when it comes to his theories of aesthetic, can you present them in the nutshell?
Yes, I agree with you that the way of his writing is as important as what he is writing about. So the topic and the style both are important. As for your questions, yes, he has got a very specific understanding of beauty, because he claims that in the philosophy of art, that's the crucial concept. Of course, that belongs to the classical tradition, but modernity was in a way rebelling against it, because the claim was that it comes close to kitsch and comes close to being a lie, because modernity brought with it so many disasters in human life that to talk about beauty seemed to be to lie about the particular society's actual state of affairs. But what he points out in his short introduction to beauty, which is perhaps the easiest way to approach his philosophy of art, is that human life is focused on beauty, not only in the sphere of high art, in the works of art of the genius, like the perfect works of Homer, Shakespeare, and the others, but also in our ordinary life. If you look around in a room like this one, or if you walk along a British park, or if you just look at a nicely dressed woman, what you experience is that beauty is ordering our life. It gives meaning to it. It gives ways of self-expression, and it makes it possible to appreciate the other, even if we do not necessarily agree, because of course tastes can be different, but human nature allows us to appreciate the effort to try to express ourselves through style, through the mode of the way that we behave, the choice of our words, the manners that we follow. All of that are crucial when we address the other. It's not simply a rational discourse that we have with each other. It's rather an embodied knowledge that we express in our ordinary behavior, and behind it there is that standard that we like to achieve, and that's the standard of beauty.
This is Common Sense Generation. If you like this channel, please subscribe, share, and comment. Your voice really matters.
And this brings us to, I would say, the last huge battle of Roger Scruton. And this is, of course, the comedy Building Better, Building Beautiful. So he saw that something which we, I think, all observe, that the characters of our cities and the buildings, that the traditional one very often, as you mentioned, bring order to everything which surrounds us, and it also brings pleasure to live in those places, to walk nearby such houses. And he started this huge battle of reshaping the architecture of United Kingdom, which was extremely difficult, and we can say that it was his, unfortunately, last battle. Tell us a little bit more.
Yes, that's a very important moment in his life, because we philosophers are useless creatures. That's the general assumption. Why? Because we only have ideas and we have nothing to do with reality. And the moment came in his life when he could actually achieve something through those ideas, and in fact transform the way our cities look like by giving advice to government how to arrange the order of the regulations which will determine the lookout of our cities. What was the question? The question was how to build useful buildings, public buildings, or even housing estates, while still preserving this demand for order and beauty. And he, as an architectural critic who very closely examined modern architecture, was convinced that if you are able to guarantee certain norms which should be followed by the architects, our cities, and not only individual buildings, but the whole cityscape can be ordered in an orderly manner. But that requires good laws, and his report, which came out just before he died, is a legacy which the Tory government tried to put into practice by regulating the building companies that are responsible for the new investments into new architectural ventures, to confine their work in order to make them fit into those historical city centers that define and distinguish the European city from other ones, and this way to appreciate the British tradition in architecture while creating new housing for new generations.
When we look at it, at the British architecture, it is already very beautiful, especially the old one and in the countryside, and buildings which survived hundreds years, and very often are restored by people who, for example, made some money in London, and then they choose the way of life an hour away when they renovate an old farm or another building, which is a very British way of living. For us people in the Eastern Europe, Hungarians, Poles, Czechs, or people from Ukraine, it is a shocking statement in a way that the communism way of life created the most horrible pieces of architecture.
And destruction of the old one.
Yes. And destruction of the old one. Very often, let's say from the practical reason, but in fact changing also the way of life. Because where you live, how you live, where you are in your neighbors is your daily life. And this is something which shaped this part of Europe very strongly. So when we look at this claim of Roger Scruton that actually the beauty in the architecture is important, it is something which this group of people, I think, can very much identify with, because after all, we look at the buildings from the 90s and they are already old. And the buildings from 200 years ago, if they survived the war, they are still beautiful.
Yes, of course, Scruton had a special interest in this part of the world, so I think that it's very important to connect his ideas and our own concerns. And interestingly, he also learned a lot from us, from our experience with the totalitarian regimes of this region, and also from the historical heritage of this region. And I think that there are certain things that we can be proud of in this respect as well. So indeed, there is an interaction between Scruton and the British tradition and the Central European tradition. And what I have in mind is, for example, Warsaw after the Second World War. There was a very powerful decision made that Warsaw needs to be rebuilt in a historical style. Of course, some people criticized it because you cannot create new buildings which will specifically imitate the old one, but I think the effort was there. And the Hungarian government these years is doing the same in the Castle Hill area, which is the historical part of Buda. They try to build back all those buildings which were not built back after the Second World War, because the communist regime regarded it as something that belonged to the feudal past, which we must pass over and which we need to forget. But history is not to be forgotten. That's the basic lesson that Roger Scruton tells us. And I think that, of course, there is another danger that history can become totalitarian over us. So we need to keep in balance our memory policies. But I think that the lesson that he teaches us, and also the lesson that he learned from our earlier generations, is that we need to remember both the achievements and our guilts. And also that we need to be able to reform, to address our new challenges with the historical lessons that we learned in our mind.
And those historical lessons are also expressed in his very small, but very short, but I think very important book, Why Culture Matters, where it was the first time when I heard such sort of statement that teaching is actually not in favor of the students, but it is in favor of the knowledge, that it doesn't, that it lives in new people, in new creatures. And we always very much look at the educational system, and especially students are eager to complain, this is not a useful knowledge, I will not use it in our everyday life, which is of course not the right approach at all at the university, because university differs from the polytechnics from this, that they teach something which doesn't necessarily need to be useful. But the fact that he mentioned that the teachers are responsible not only for the students, but they are responsible also for the knowledge itself, the knowledge of the of our past, of our ancestors, of this cultural region, not to be forgotten, to live forward, to be changed, to be used again, but to be alive.
Yes, indeed. For Roger, it was important to understand the role of the intellectual. We tend to forget that intellectuals are not for their own career, but they should regard themselves as responsible for the tradition that they transfer to the next generation. And that tradition has major achievements, and those achievements are the ways to approach truth. And indeed, we teachers, we need to be able to cultivate those traditions and pass it over to the next generation. And in that, we, as our students, are part of a common venture. A university is a community of professors and students in search of the truth. That's the medieval Christian tradition of the university, and we need to remember it, even though we live in a postmodern world. That's the tradition that we are part of. And part of the problem of present-day university education is that we tend to forget about it, and we think that we serve industrial interests with creating new force for jobs. That's not the case. We need to understand the human condition. We need to understand truth, and we need to understand why we are here on the earth. And philosophy, as a special subject matter that we teach at our universities, is for that particular focus, and that's a very special luxury which I keep enjoying.
And I think it's a perfect punchline to finish this interview. Professor, thank you very much for sharing all of this.
Thank you for your interest.
And I do hope that this video podcast actually served this purpose, which was just expressed, to pass the truth and the knowledge to also new people in the young generation. So that's why thank you, the viewers, for watching it. And I also thank Polish National Foundation for making this video podcast possible.
This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation.